this video is part of a series. There was so much interest. I happened to mention I was doing an airbrush video. It's definitely part of a series. So this is just about the air compressor getting air to the airbrush itself, some of its parts and how it works. I'm just doing a general overview of the airbrush. These won't be one a week. I'm very much hoping that in the next day or two I can knock out another one, and I'll have this whole 5-part series up. Maybe the last one will be next week's YouTube Wednesday. So within that one full week's period, you'll get 5 videos, 10, maybe 20 minutes each. They're going to cover the airbrush itself and the air supply, the airbrush paint, as far as what you're going to put through your airbrush. So I'll talk about paint and makeup and the difference. Third thing I'm going to talk about is practicing. What are the techniques of an airbrush? What can it do with paint? What can't it do with paint? When to use the airbrush, when not to use the airbrush, and a couple drills that you can do to practice and make yourself better at airbrushing. The fourth video will cover airbrush makeup. I'm going to actually do a couple airbrush makeups for you using airbrush makeup and an airbrush. The fifth video is going to be on cleaning an airbrush. And I'll have 4 or 5 different kinds. I'll get them good and gunky, and then I'll clean them out. And here you go. First thing is first, let's talk about your air supply. A lot of airbrush kits come with a small compressor. Doesn't matter what your airbrush supply comes to. What does matter is the kind of fitting that hooks up to your airbrush and what size that is. Different airbrushes have proprietary sizes. This is the size for some Pachets and some Iwatas, but your airbrush is going to come with a hose. You can't just get any hose because you have to make sure that the fitting size is right. This Pachet H here has a much smaller thread on this than this guy does. This happens to be a Harbor Freight airbrush. So that's a different size. So I can't just take this airbrush off and put that one on without some kind of an adapter. And those little adapters are very weird. So they're very rare. I'd almost write them off that you're not going to get an adapter. But I want to talk air supply first. Right now, you can't hear my compressor because my compressor is actually in another building. I'm in my home shop and in my garden shed about 10 feet from my garage, out the door that way, my air compressor. It has a power cord that's run into the house, and it has a PVC pipe that runs into the house. In that PVC pipe is the power cord and the air line. So that air line runs into here with a quick connect on it. And on that quick connect, I have a regulator. Out there, right after the air compressor, I have a moisture trap. A moisture trap is very important to get water out of the line, or else it's going to come out with your paint or your makeup when you're trying to airbrush. So out there is a moisture trap. Have a moisture trap in line with your airbrush. Then I have my hose. I have a quick connect on here in order to take this off. This is a regulator here close to the guns. I have a splitter on because this little airbrush here is one of my favorites ever. It's a Harbor Freight airbrush, and it is a $10 airbrush. I talk about this airbrush at length on several other videos, but basically, let me pull this one apart. It's got a connector in it. Basically, this airbrush is awesome to me because I can change a color just like that. Take off one color, put on another color. And it comes with 5 little bottles. So it comes for $10. I get this airbrush, 5 colors. This will not do any detail. This is a single action airbrush. All right. There's 2 kinds of airbrushes: single action, double action. I'll get into them in a bit. But if I could only have one airbrush ever, it's this one. Let's talk about airline still. Regulator. I'm going to run my air regulator here for painting masks at about 50 psi. You can get this piece at Harbor Freight too. You can get it at Home Depot. You get a regulator almost anywhere. if you're blowing on the people's skin, try and stay between 50 and 20 because it's going to, it can hurt. It's going to be really cold, number one, but you know, you go like to 75 or so, you're kind of exfoliating them by sandblasting them with paint. You don't really want that. So I have my regulator set, and I have mine set on 50 right now. That's what I paint masks at. It's a good pressure for blowing stuff out of the airbrush, and it'll move thicker paints like I use for latex masks. Now let's get to the airbrushes themselves. I have here a new one from Harbor Freight, a double action airbrush. This is a $20 to $21, $25 airbrush from Harbor Freight. I picked up one today so you guys can see what a lot of you are going to see new. Dual action airbrush, that's what's important. What's not important is what brand this is, okay? Dual action means it has a trigger on top. I'm going to push down for air and back for paint. Honestly, how much paint you get is the big deal. Very few people have enough control in their fingers in order to only push down a little bit to get a little bit of air. Do that at your regulator. That's what your regulator's for, okay? How much paint you get is your control if you want to blast it or whatnot. Out of the box, this one has a cone protector on it to protect the nose of the airbrush. I normally see this piece the first time I unbox it and then I lose it because it's not an important piece to me. It's not a big deal to me. If you like to keep your things perfect and pristine, you should know where that is. Maybe put it back in the little case. These airbrushes also have this piece on the back, which is, it looks neat. It's a stylized piece of aluminum. That's not how they look once they've lived with me for a while. They just become like that. And that's how it is because I would like to access this needle. If I'm using something very thick, this is the needle of the airbrush. It responds to a tip that's in there. There's a cone around that needle. And by loosening this nut and sliding the needle back and forth, you change how much distance there is between the needle and that cone. If it's all the way forward, it's filling that cone. If you pull it back, there's room for paint to go around it. What the trigger does is moves that needle. Watch this nut. Trigger does, it moves that needle, opening up the space in the cone. All right. So what this airbrush comes with is this little adapter piece, which is meant for 1/8" tubing that slides on over this. Doesn't come with any 1/8" tubing. It doesn't come with a hose. They actually sell a hose for this airbrush. That's another $8 or so. But it is two of the right sizes. This guy is a 1/4 inch. Standard to most compressors. That's what that size is. On my rig here, I've got a T-splitter, and it has two 1/4 inch sizes. The 1/8" one, it goes from a 1/4 inch to 1/8". That's for my little black airbrush. This one is for my Pache or for Harbor Freight or for whatever kind. I happen to have a Pache H on there right now, and I will take this off in order to put on this hose to use this airbrush here in just a bit. Yeah, it's just an air fitting. Right now this is pressurized. I can tell because it's got 60 psi. If I unscrewed this right now, it would shoot air everywhere. So I'll do that in just a bit. This is a different adapter piece right here that comes on this hose because they don't know what kind of airbrush you're using. They want you to be able to use their hose. And this comes with a regular size and the adapter to knock it to 1/4 inch. Now, regular is up in the air because remember, all these are proprietary. But this 1/4 inch size is what's going to go to a compressor. On my compressor in the other room, there's a 1/4 inch male thread sticking out of it that you put attachments on. And that's how I got my hose all the way out here. And I keep it 1/4 inch up until I go down to the proprietary airbrush because I don't want to have to mess with a bunch of connections. Air is going to come into the hose, into the airbrush, and paint will come into the airbrush right here. So you shouldn't have a lot of paint back in here. This is mostly just for air. It all goes up here and it's forced into the area with the needle. I'm going to take off the first bit of this, and there you can see the cone and the needle tip. If I take off this second bit, they're delicate tools. Use delicacy when handling them, not giant pliers. This piece holds the cone, an O-ring, and it's the tip. There's 3 holes in that, and in those 3 holes, that's where the air comes through to push out the paint. Over top of this goes this piece. All your paint and air mix right inside of this little piece right here. That's where it all happens. Everything else, the delivery system for one or the other. Alright, so the paint gets up to the tip. How much paint comes out is based on how far back your needle is or how far away it is from the cone. And air pushes out of those holes and propels the paint forward. Pretty easy. Different on this guy, which is a single action. On this single action, it's a siphon technology. So basically the air pressure going across this hole, and there's a hole right here, the air pressure going across this hole causes air to go into here, which pushes out the paint. And as soon as it gets pushed out, that air pressure from the nozzle shoots it out. Far less precise than the other one. A Pache H is similar, but you are going to, this is a very dirty airbrush. I just got done using it a while ago. And you actually change the cone needle relationship right here, okay, by making that adjustment. So I can tighten it down to get less paint, loosen it up to get more paint. Single action airbrush, meaning that's the button, right? All I do is I push this to get air. I don't have any control over how much paint. My paint comes from here, but my control's not in the trigger. I like this because I can do one setting, and I can, if I set it for thin lines, all I'm doing is thin lines. I don't have to worry about my wacky finger position or whatever. If I need to go broader and wider, I can open that puppy up, and then I can make big, wide lines and such with my airbrush. But if I do go really wide, I want one of these guys. This is nice because without adjusting anything, aside from changing your finger, dual action airbrush, I can go from thin lines to thick lines and get decent coverage. If I really want to cover well, what I do is I just back my needle out so that I get a lot of paint going out of there and push my button down for air, and that'll get me some coverage if I want to base an actor out for airbrush makeup or whatever. I will talk a bit about paints coming up. So I'm not going to cover them right now, but the same paint I use for props and things is not what I use on people because it's not made for people's skin. And you don't know what's in it. It's not safe. Now, how do you get paint into this airbrush? This one here, it comes with 2 options. It comes with a bottle, which is an easy way to go, and it comes with a color cup. A color cup, if I'm doing something really small, I might use a color cup. If I'm doing teeth or something. Because you put a few drops of paint into here, and then you can paint whatever it is that you're working on by sucking the color out, the paint, out of the color cup into the airbrush. But if I'm going to turn or something, I'm just pouring out paint out of here. So I don't like that very much. Some airbrushes have a holder up on top. The Pache Talon has a holder up on top of the airbrush that you can put paint down into. So a lot of different airbrush, they have different ways, but that's just plumbing, man. Okay, that's the difference. It's just plumbing. What's the difference between this airbrush and Iwata Eclipse? Precision milling. Your threads are going to be perfect on an Iwata. Your distance from the cone to the needle all the way around that shape is going to be the same. It's not going to change or alter. Whereas this one's going to have some imperfections. This was made, built by the lowest bidder in a factory in China, So was, by the way, the Iwata, but they're working hard on that in order to have quality standards. The quality standards on these are not as good, but it's a $25 airbrush. It's not a $100 airbrush. And I tend to go for a cheaper airbrush or a less refined airbrush because I tend to find I don't need that kind of precision for a lot of what I do. So this airbrush works very well for me. You can see I have a couple pressed into service. These Pache H's, a great single action airbrush, and these little black guys from Harbor Freight. I do a lot of airbrush work, and these get the job done 99.9% of the time. I'm not a professional airbrush artist. A Iwata is a great gun. A Pache is a great gun. There's a lot of great airbrushes out there. I just don't need a great airbrush. You know, understand? Nothing against them. This does the job for me. If you have one of those, great. It also works the same way. I talked about the color cup. Pull that off. The bottle. This bottle that comes with this, it's glass. I think the glass ones are much easier to clean than plastic bottles are. You can buy plastic bottles off of eBay, and almost all of them that take bottles have the same nozzle size that just fit right in here. It's only a couple types of airbrush that have a different bottle size to fit into almost any other airbrush. This is not where they get you proprietary. It's the air threads where they get you with proprietary. Air threads, needle size, that kind of thing. But on this bottle, there are two important parts. You need to have a tube on here. I have been trying to airbrush, and like this isn't working. What's stuck? And this tube had fallen off inside the bottle, so I was getting no air up to the nozzle of the bottle. And there's two things you have to worry about: this nozzle, which attaches to this tube that goes down into your paint, and there's a little tiny hole right up here. Right there is a little tiny hole that has to be clear. Often I will keep a pin or a bread tie right next to where I'm working so that I can just poke into these holes and make sure there's no paint covering those. If air can't go into the bottle, paint can't go out, and that causes clogs sometimes. So a lot of times a clog or poor paint coming out isn't always your airbrush. Sometimes it's this sucker. It's your bottle. Bottle's a great convenient way to go. It's not like a color cup. I'm not going to spill it. It can spill out of that tiny hole, but that's a lot less likely and a lot harder to do. Handling your airbrush. You need to use your forefinger in order to control this. Think of it like a pen. Because you need some precision. I guess you could do it with your middle finger. I'm just not that dexterous, and I've table sawed my hand and stuff, so, and you know, I can't feel it from running the heat gun on it. I don't have very dexterous hands anymore. They're strong hands, but they're not dexterous. So I really need my forefinger on there. Don't hold it in such a way where you stop the needle from moving. I don't think I even can because I got really weird shaped hands. But make sure that the needle can flow back and forth and that you can use the pad of your forefinger to depress and pull back on that needle. All right? That is the basics of the airbrush.